Today I'm gonna try to get as much of the floor done as possible. So what I did is I bought this 3/4 inch. It's maple. It's nicer stuff. It's actually more for cabinetry, but it's the only thing they had really where the price made sense at Lowe's. I could have gotten a separate whiteboard, but it was just cheaper to get the whole ply and then just rip every strip that I need. And I just made like a self-guide with one of the pieces here because I won't need all the 3/4 inch. I mean, here's the rough layout. So I'm hoping I can fit these cross members into these holes, and then everything will match up with the insulation in each of these spaces. Next I need to cut these strips down into size, and it varies all the way throughout the van, so I've taken all those measurements and I'll probably take them once more just to make sure I don't fuck it up. You always want to measure twice, cut once, so let's get this stuff going here. Alright, so now I am putting in the main braces for the floor. So with these, I just have 2-inch carriage bolts that reach to the bottom. Flush drilled the top hole, and then drilled down through the frame, or through the actual the metal down below. And so that's flush, so I'll be able to lay the subfloor on the top. And I'm only doing carriage bolts on the back and then the front one, and that should provide enough support once I get the cross members in between those. And then these ones, I'm just going to use these metal self-tap screws just going through these, and that should provide enough support on the middle ones just to keep those down and snug up against the floor. And I'm using these self-drilling number 12 by 1.5 inch. So it's got the hex head. What I've been doing first is drilling like a pilot hole so that I can countersink it. But what you want to actually have the diameter be is not as big as this hex, but as big as your bit that'll be putting it in, because this needs to fall inside that hole so you can get it all the way in to where it's flush. And they are self-tapping, but I've found that I've had to actually drill through the metal with the equivalent size to the screw, because it just wants to pick up the wood and push it away while it's trying to tap through the metal. So I've just been going through getting the initial tap with this, and then following up with this, and then drilling these in. And I'm going to be measuring from this back brace up, making sure that everything's the same length between each one. Now, just because of the layout, there are going to be differing lengths in between the horizontal beams, but that's pretty much the layout. Those are just some extra boards there, but it's about roughly every 16 to 18 inches, just because there's so much stuff in the way of the gas tank. I wanted to make sure I had enough support in between up here, just so that there's no low-lying areas or anything like that. And then I'm just lining them up with the other holes along the line so it'll be easier to find them later on. The zones are a little offset because this area is fucky, but now the question is, where do I put this one? Because this ridge only lasts until about right here. So I'd have to put it so close to the edge. I think I might tap into this one and then come over to this, but we'll see how it battens down. There you go. So those are all done, except I might add one right here. We'll see once I start tightening down from this end, and we'll see how it goes from there to there. So now I'll move to the smaller bit here to tap for these screws, and I'll just screw in as I go along just to keep things tight and make sure that these two stay the same distance apart. Make sure I keep square. So something really important when you're going to drill holes in the bottom is you want to make sure wherever you're drilling, you're double checking multiple times where those screws will be. So right now I'm just kind of following this line up there. I don't know if you can see that screw right there, and there's another one back there. So I'm just following that line up, and I know I'm using this as a reference point, this bolt here, because that's where my next board's going to be. It butts up against the top of this bolt, so it's 3 inches from there. And now I am going over the gas tank, so that's something you want to be really careful about. And I went through, took pictures up there, ran my hand back there, ran all along that beam, and I should be fine running along the lines that I was going to run along here. So these, I'm just following up these lines. This is a little janky because it switches direction and then it switches direction back here again, so that's a little fucked up, but most of the other lines are pretty much down the middle of every other ridge, and then I have one set back here. And then also where there's gaps, because there's dips, I'm cutting just little pieces of 2x4s to fill in those gaps. This was like a dent that was in the floor, so I wanted to make sure this was going to be sturdy, so I cut this to size and then fit it in there and then glued that with some wood glue right here. So now you're not going to have any kind of movement downward if there's any weight put on this from the cabinetry that's going over here. It shouldn't rub then. And a little play on this side, but with that kill mat, and once that weight's on there, it should be fine. So after double checking this length again and tap drilling these 2 holes, I'm going to drive this in. I am putting a little bit of pressure behind it. And that's flushed up. So now I'll just keep moving down the line here. Well, I finally got all the cross beams in. That was a fucking task. Just a little tip. When you're putting in these carriage bolts, you want to make sure not to strip them down. So what I use to kind of hold it in place, since I am working on by myself, just this 35-pound weight. I threw a dime in there and stacked that with washers, and that seemed to help hold it down, because that one was a bitch, and I ended up having to tap down deeper because it stripped out around the edge. So glad this is at least done. Now move on to the pieces that will meet up in there.
Now that we have all of the lateral pieces in place, it's time to move on to getting the vertical ones in. I did 3 rows of these that I tried to spread fairly evenly across the base of the van, and there was some deviations where it didn't come straight down, but I got it as close as I could in certain areas. Had to make some certain custom cuts in certain areas to fit into the actual channels. And the channels, I had to calculate the depth. So what I did was since I used a 3/4 inch crosswise, I had to figure out something that would fit into the grooves here on the bottom channels so that it would come out even to the top of the cross members. And the ridge ends up being about a 1/4 inch, so I did need an inch thickness of the vertical beams. So I had to actually glue together 2 pieces of the 1/2 inch of this version of plywood, which is just the maple, and I had to glue those together. So I basically cut my strips, glued those together, put those under pressure, and then I had my actual 1-inch size vertical beams that came down and fit in between the lateral beams to make a full grid pattern. So now what I've had to come around and do, just to make sure these are flush, is adding in some more of this kill mat in the low-lying areas, and then I have some wood stints down in there in the really bad areas. But for the most part, everything is all flush and lined up now, and I'm just gonna glue this all in using a bead of adhesive caulk between them as well to try to eliminate squeaking. I think just caulking them and that weight of the floor holding everything in place would be fine. So I don't think I'll have to go through on the bottom of everything and make sure that that's good. It should be all in place. So I'm ready to start putting in all the pieces, and what I'm using is this liquid nails fuse it. It's all surface, so I think that should hold it in pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a small bead here, and then on the bottom of the wood piece, and then I'm going to stick it down and put some weight on it to make sure I get good contact surface pressure, and that should help keep it held in place. And before I do the adhesive, I just spray it with this degreaser and wipe it down just to make sure it gets a good contact surface as well, so there's no dust or anything in there.
And I just want to make sure I got good pressure here. A little high on the side, but I think once I get that brick down, it should be pretty good. What's up, everyone? So today I get to pull all these makeshift weights off I did to make sure everything was glued down. So yeah, ends up that these what now are pretty much paperweight magnetic ballasts that we had laying around, and then I had a few of these concrete blocks, my flooring, my big heavy duty jack, jugs of oil, toolbox, whatever you could find laying around, just to make sure everything was evenly stuck down. So now we'll just have to cut the insulation and start getting that dropped in.